Welcome to A House Divided, coming to you live from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. If it's on our shelves, it's history. My name is Bjorn Skaptason, and I am a host. I am your host for today's event on A House Divided. It is a live book signing event. Here coming to you from Chicago, from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, from the oldest antiquarian bookshop that I know of in Chicago. And we're here with one of our longtime friends of the shop and a friend of this show. It's Peter Cozzens. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you so much, Bjorn.
Yeah, it's great to see you here. I'm gonna take just a minute here to acquaint our viewers with the show because not everybody's a return viewer. If you're not familiar with our show, A House Divided is a live book signing and book discussion program coming to you from Abraham Lincoln in Chicago. We will meet with authors, such as we're meeting with Peter today, to discuss their new books. But here is the difference, folks. Here is the difference between A House Divided and other book talk programs. If you're watching A House Divided here on our Facebook feed, you are at a book signing. You're not at a lecture and you're not just looking at an interview with an author. You're at a book signing as though Peter was at the independent bookshop down in the corner in your hometown, and you're going to go in there and you're going to ask Peter questions and you're going to buy a signed book. And that is what we are doing today. So there's a link in the comments of this live feed where you can buy Deadwood. Gold, Guns, and Greed in the American West. Let me share a picture of that dust jacket with you because this is a fabulous dust jacket. I've even had comments on our ads. Nobody ever comments in our ads, Peter,
Really?
on the quality of the dust jacket. And I've had people comment, wow, I love that dust jacket. Who designed that dust jacket? Why don't we have that be our first question, Peter? Who designed that dust jacket?
Actually, I can take credit for part of it. I recommended that photo
Mhm.
be used as a dust jacket photo. To me, it was one of the two or three iconic photos of Deadwood,
Yeah,
and the lettering, the Deadwood and the gold guns and green with the little gold flecks. That was the designer's idea. I think that really enhances the
I think
picture.
it does. Yeah, this is a dust jacket. I'm a big fan of dust jackets, Peter. As you know, I
So
collect
am I.
because I love to collect books with great dust
Right.
jackets. And while there are very talented artists making dust jackets today, in previous generations there were masterpieces of dust jacket design, original art and things like that. But this is a great one for selling the book. We might talk about that a little bit more later. But first, let me tell everybody that if you want to order the book, you click on the link in the comments. You can order the book. If you want to ask a question of Peter Cozzens, just ask the question in the comments. I'm going to look at the comments. I'm going to review them, and perhaps I'll look at them 30 minutes into our discussion, and we'll see if we have some questions that you want answered about Deadwood. I'll be honest with you, folks. If you want to ask the questions of Peter, that's fine with me. I have a bunch of questions that I have written, but if you have questions for the author and you want to ask them in real time, I would just as soon entertain your questions than have all of the questions that I have written. The main reason being that I've been able to read the book. So I know the answers to the questions I'm going to ask. So I would love to have the
I
folks
hope
at
I
home.
do.
What's that?
I hope I do too.
Yeah, I'd love to have the folks at home ask questions for us. Now, let me introduce the our author today. Peter Cozzens is an author and an editor of 18 acclaimed books on the American Civil War and the American Indian Wars. In 2002, Peter was awarded the American Foreign Service Association's highest honor, the William R. Rivkin Award, given annually to one foreign service worker for exemplary moral courage, integrity, and creative dissent. Peter lives in Kensington, Maryland, and as you can gather from his bio, Peter has written 18 books while also managing to put in a full career in the United States Foreign Service. So there's much to be admired in that resume, if you ask me. And congratulations to you on that, Peter. Now, the
Thank you,
book we're going
Bill.
to talk about is Deadwood, Gold, Guns, and Greed in the American West. It comes to us from Alfred A. Knopf. We are selling first edition copies with our custom signed book plates. Thank you, Peter, for signing those book plates. The book costs $35. And if you order it during the event, we will ship it right out to you. It will come to you in your home. So I guess that covers all of the introduction there, Peter. Thanks again for joining us. And let's just, gosh, usually I ask an author to give us like an elevator pitch for the book, and I think you might get into doing that in a minute. But I'm going to go ahead and ask an even more absurdly broad question because it's a question that I did not understand until I read the book, and that is simply, what is Deadwood? What is this thing?
You mean what is the word? Where
Yeah,
does it
what are we
derive
talking
from?
about? Yeah, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't know it until I learned about it.
Well, the term Deadwood was the name that the first miners who penetrated the gulch in which Deadwood rests. It's a town that's only about a few hundred yards wide from wall to wall in this gulch. And when the first miners penetrated that area in the winter of 1875-76, they were hindered in their gold digging by just acres and acres of downed trees. It was one giant deadening. I mean, they were
Mhm.
just dead pine trees floating around in muck all over the place. And the reason for that is not known. It may have been a tornado that went through there. It may have been an infestation of insects that
Mhm.
caused all these pine trees to collapse. But when they were feeling their way through there, they decided to name the place Deadwood
Deadwood.
Gulch. And then
Yeah.
from that, Deadwood.
Right,
Very,
right. It
very,
becomes
very
Deadwood.
prosaic, actually.
Right. By the time you get to learning about it, this whole concept of the word Deadwood, it applies to a town, it applies to a gulch, it applies to a period of time, it applies to all of the adventures and all of the crazy characters that go around this. It applies to the history of the Black Hills and the contested history of the Black Hills. Who owns it? Who owns the hills? Who owns the mines? Who owns the? There's just so much that is revealed by asking the simple question, what do we mean by Deadwood? And that's one of the things that I think makes this such a great topic for a book. Because once you start pulling the threads, they just keep coming.
And it's a microcosm of the entire Wild West and the legends that grew up around the West. And Deadwood itself, remarkably, it was legendary while it was still growing, while it was still in its formative period, while it was still in this rough and raucous uh, first 3 years of its existence. It was already a legend,
Mhm.
thanks to Eastern newspapers, which were focused on the Black Hills and the gold, because the economy so badly needed gold. This is after the Panic of 1873, and in part from a dime novel character named Deadwood Dick, who premiered in 1877 and went on to be the most popular dime novel. And dime novels, for those who aren't familiar with them, are kind of like the pulp fiction of today.
Mhm.
And dime novels uh, normally dealt with either heroic figures or villainous figures, fictionalized real characters, or in some cases made up from pure cloth in the West. And Deadwood Dick, who was made up from pure cloth, became the second most popular outlaw in the dime novels after Jesse James. And there eventually, the Deadwood Dick series ran until 1899. They came out at a rate of one a month. And Deadwood Dick's, he was a stage robber, and his lair, his secret lair was Deadwood. And the author's descriptions of Deadwood is this wild, you know, raucous 24-hour a day circus of gunslinging and gambling and prostitution and this and that. I mean, that captivated the nation's attention. That's how the nation came to perceive Deadwood, even while it was still in its early days.
Right. Yeah, and just months into its existence, from a gulch with a windfall in it to a nationally recognized, uh, well, El Dorado is what I think people would like to imagine it was.
Sinful city. Yeah,
Yeah, or a
right.
sinful city. Yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, but so before we get into the actual details of the book, tell me, did the myth of Deadwood interfere or influence in any way your attempt to get to the historical truth of what happened?
Um, initially, because I was inclined to believe all the legends and not to question them, and also not to look too deeply into them. But in the course of writing the book, I can honestly say that legends, of course, are based on fact to a greater or lesser degree,
Mhm.
and the actual events, the killing of Wild Bill Hickok, the activities of Calamity Jane in Deadwood, the Lakota Indian raids that took place around Deadwood, all these things, the true story is more exciting, I think, and more unbelievable than legend.
Yeah,
And certainly just as rich and just as exciting.
right, right. And yeah, it's one of those situations where uh, uh, I'm not going to say truth is fr stranger than fiction. Truth is better
Right.
than
In
fiction
fact, the
is.
Washington Post in its review says something to the effect that this is too remarkable to be believable, but it is. It's real.
Yeah.
It's history.
And like I said, we took a look at the dust jacket before, and we uh, uh, looked at that. Now we're going to dig into this photograph a little bit later because this is one of my favorites. But one of the first people we meet is one of the indigenous people that is important in the history of the Black Hills and Deadwood before it even starts, and that's Black Elk. And his story is sort of a oh gosh, an important vision. Am I going to call it like a vision of the misfortune that is coming toward his people? That even before Deadwood develops, Black Elk seems to have, as a child, seems to understand that this is going to be a really bad thing for the Lakota.
Right. From the picture you showed, the Indian who was Black Elk is the one who's not scowling.
Let's take another look at it. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that folks can
It's the one that has the more gentle expression on his face.
yeah, yeah. Um, and and he's very youthful in this photograph.
Right. Well, I decided I really wanted the plight of the Lakota Indians and the loss of the Black Hills and their struggle for the Black Hills to be an important undercurrent in the book and to be uh, a thread that would run through the entire story. And I did so by bookending it with the experiences of Black Elk. And he was important. He is considered one of the great mystics, not just American Indian uh, mystics, but one of the great mystics of his era, and is still very much revered today for his thoughts that were written down by a white man. But Black Elk Speaks is a classic of Native American literature, and so I wanted to again I wanted a sympathetic Lakota character who I could legitimately bookend the story with. And the story begins with an 8-year-old black elk having this vision when he's very sick, deathly ill, this vision of being transported to the highest peak, the highest point in the Black Hills, which was until recently known as Harney Peak. It has since been renamed Black Elk Peak. He's transported to this high peak, and he has this vision of the Lakotas going into a steep and sad decline, and them being replaced by the Wasishu, by the white men. And that is a perfect entree to the Black Hills Gold Rush and Deadwood. And his experiences that occurred simultaneous with the settling of Deadwood, such as raiding immigrant parties on their ways to the way to the Black Hills, or fighting at the Little Bighorn, and to his final experience as an elderly man, finally climbing Black Elk Peak. All that just fit in so nicely with a larger point that I wanted to make in the book, and that is that Deadwood was unique among all towns in the West, perhaps in all American communities, in that it was founded, built, constructed on land that belonged to the Indians by treaty. Obviously, all land in this country belonged to the Indians at one time, but this was land that had specifically been set aside for them in perpetuity in the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. So Deadwood was not only a lawless town in the sense that Tombstone and Dodge City were a lot of gunplay, shootings, and this and that, but it was inherently a lawless town because it was subject to no federal, territorial, or state law since it was on Indian land.
Right. Yeah, and I had written a question here along that line. You call Deadwood an illegal community. Yeah, and is this the nature of that illegality?
Mhm.
It's not just uh, you. If I read it right, you portray the existence of the town as a sort of a crime.
Exactly, and it was, and up to a point, the government recognized that and recognized it until President Grant was faced with the dilemma of, okay, we're not going to be able to get these people out of the Black Hills. We badly need Black Hills gold for this for a stagnated gold standard economy. So we have to somehow obtain the Black Hills by hook or crook from the Indians. And at that point, the government started changing its tune. It started to downplay its objections to the existence of Deadwood. At first, the government objected to Deadwood as being a kind of a thorn in the side of Lakota and likely something to provoke war with the Lakotas. And over a short period of time, flipped that on its head and decided, well, we need Black Hills gold. The Lakota aren't going to negotiate the Black Hills away. We're going to have to provoke a war with them to get the Black Hills. And then the illegality of Deadwood was not so big a concern in the government's eyes,
Right,
but it
right.
was still a matter of fact.
It's a little tangential, but you do write about it in the book. And so I'm going to leap to a topic that I know a lot of people do know about, and that is the 1876 Lakota or Sioux War. And to to what extent did Deadwood and the invasion of the Black Hills lead to this war that leads to the Battle of Little Bighorn and the death of George Armstrong Custer and the Seventh Cavalry and all that?
It is direct causation.
Direct
If
causation.
direct causation. That the Grant administration. I wrote an article a number of years ago for Smithsonian Magazine about Grant's the secret cabal he put together in the White House in the winter of 1875, 76, after Lakota had refused to sell the Black Hills at government terms. The cabal he put together to figure out how to provoke the Lakota into war so they would be compelled to surrender the Black Hills. And that was pure and simple. That was the cause of the Lakota War,
Hmm.
to to get the Black Hills and by extension Deadwood as the principal community and gold producing area in the Black Hills, to get that firmly in white man's hands, so to speak,
Hmm.
wrested from the Lakota.
Did you find, are there examples of specific violent Lakota resistance to Deadwood in the Black Hills?
Yes, the Lakota, of course, by and large, were preoccupied with fighting the army on the periphery of the Black Hills and further west, and of course, at Little Bighorn and in the Bighorn country. Um, but there were Indian raids staged in the Black Hill. In fact, Crazy Horse, after the Little Bighorn, gravitated with his band to the country just north of the Black Hills. He had been born in the Black Hills, and the thought of losing them was, of course, anathema to him. He couldn't attack the Black Hills with in full force because the army was nipping at his heels. But Crazy Horse himself led a couple dozen warriors in raids in the Black Hills that threw Deadwood into complete commotion. I mean, these raids were magnified in the telling. One miner killed became a threat to the existence of Deadwood. And whereas the existence of Deadwood was never directly threatened, people certainly perceived it that way. And the excitement and fear and confusion that arose from that, both in 1876 and a year later in 1877, when there were more raids on Black Hills, really make for some entertaining reading,
Yeah.
enlightening reading.
Yeah. Now Deadwood is a mining town. I mean, that's why they're there in the first place. But it something about the book that surprised me. A lot of the book about surprised me because it was totally new topic to me. But I had an idea of what gold mining was. That was basically 49ers panning gold out of a stream somewhere. And I was very impressed with how quickly these the people that went into Deadwood Gulch created very heavily engineered uh, mining companies and mines and things like that. It was again, it's one of those pictures that's not the stereotypical prospector with a mule. There's very many different types of mining. Can you give us a couple of examples of
Sure.
how they're getting the gold out?
Initially, it was the prospector with his pan and pick and his long tom, which is kind of like cradle-like device for
Mhm.
extracting gold from gravel and mud and whatnot. But that required the gold to be either on the surface, like in stream beds or in ravines, or very close to the surface. And that's called placer mining. And the placer mines ran out by late 1879. They were pretty much playing out. In fact, that's when the story proper ends in late 1879, when the placer mines are running out and when Deadwood burns almost completely to the ground in a great fire. As the placer mines were running out, it became evident that there was more gold deeper in the earth.
Yeah. I'm going
Or
to show a
what
picture of the dust jacket once again because as you pointed out to me earlier, there is a placer mine in your dust jacket
exactly, that's a
in the
placer
middle
mine
of
right
Main
there,
Street.
right in the middle of Main Street.
So
And
yeah, there's a picture. If you don't know what Peter's talking about, there's a picture of it right there in the dust jacket.
And so as the placer mines were worked out, even the placer miners were aware of another kind of gold mining, that is quartz mining, because gold is contained deeper in the earth in quartz. It adheres to quartz, and by digging out the quartz and treating it through chemical processes and whatnot, you're able to extract the gold. Well, that requires a lot of capital. I mean, a lot of capital, a lot of manpower, machine power. And so as the 1870s and the placer era, which coincided with the wild days of Deadwood, as that period sort of began to play out, you had George Hearst, first and foremost, William Randolph Hearst's father, coming in from California with a lot of capital, buying up a number of these placer mines and converting them into quartz mines, digging deeper and deeper and deeper into the earth until the largest quartz mine, the Homestake mine, became the most productive gold mine in United States history.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I was going to ask, we don't need to spend a lot of time on it because I think you've already covered it. But I did have a question of, hey, there was this gold rush to the Black Hills and to Deadwood, and I was going to ask, did it actually pay out as much as Americans thought it would? And it seems like it did. It seems like that this was it it may not have been it seems that it didn't make too many of the wildcat miners rich, but by the time someone like Hearst moved in, it seems like it really did yield a lot of gold.
Exactly. I mean, you could number the placer miners out of the thousands who drifted into Deadwood, who were attracted by the prospect of making a quick fortune in gold. You know, not more than maybe two or three score miners really made a reasonable fortune, which, say $100,000, maybe which is like equivalent to $1 million today, roughly. Uh, Maybe two or three score miners. So one miner took out in the early days of the placer mines. He had a particularly rich claim he took out in within a few months of him staking claim to the mine. Took out $400,000
Hmm.
in 1876 currency worth of gold. But a lot of the miners who did make a fair amount ended up spending it on in the brothels and saloons and gambling joints in Deadwood.
Right.
So the money was recycled into the Deadwood economy to support the brothels, the saloons, and the gambling joints, and
Right.
it also the further growth of legitimate businesses too.
Right. Yeah. And you point out in the book that if somebody takes a lot, if a miner takes a lot of gold out, it he usually has to transport it, maybe to Chicago, in
Mm-hmm.
order to liquidate it and turn it into cash. And what's happening in Deadwood appears to be happening so fast that by the time he gets back, he may not have a claim anymore or be able to get any more out. Am I right about that?
Yes, yes, things happened so fast in Deadwood from the discovery of the first mine in November 1875 until April 1876, when there were over 200 storefronts and over 3,000 people in Deadwood. I mean, its growth was so quick that I relate how some of the pioneers who lived into the 20th century compared it to living in a motion picture. They felt
Oh,
things were happening so quickly. They felt that they were living, 10 years in one year, a
mhm.
year in a month. It just was dizzying, the pace of growth of Deadwood.
Right. And then while it's there for the mining, and you've suggested this already, so let's dive into it. While it exists for the mining, uh, it is the rest of the institutions of civilization, we'll call it, that leap into existence almost out of whole cloth,
Mm-hmm.
almost from nothing. First of all, there's the miners. They create a kind of money, and then suddenly there's all of the institutions of a large city in this tiny little neighborhood, and you've got the obviously gambling. Everybody's going to want to get drunk, but also people need to be fed. Groceries. How do you get the groceries in? There's got to be infrastructure. There's streets. The sex trade is going to be booming, and and gambling is going to make a lot of millionaires too. Or I'm going to call them millionaires. I don't know if they made $1 million, uh, but the point is I think you want to address it is how do all of these institutions spring into existence from nowhere? There's people come in on stagecoaches or something like that.
They come in, some came in on foot, some came in from ox trains. After the town was already established, the stagecoach
Hmm.
became a way to travel. But it started also simply. The first bank, for instance, at Deadwood, consisted of one one iron safe that a guy happened to own. That became the first bank of Deadwood, and he transacted all the business out of a tent and this safe, and he exchanged gold dust for greenbacks and eventually for bank drafts on his little tent bank. And that's how these places sprang up. They were in one of the pictures that we're going to look at, there's an early brothel called the Cat's Meow. I'll point it out to you. That is nothing but a tent with a few logs on each side. And
Mhm.
that's how most of the businesses started out. And I'll give a plug to the TV series Deadwood at
Yeah.
this moment. Um, it really got the atmosphere of Deadwood right. The filth, the stench, sense of almost claustrophobic sense. They got that exactly right, and that I hope also comes through in my book. Just how wild and how quickly thrown up this town was, and yet it managed to thrive, and it ended up being kind of bifurcated into what was called the Badlands, which is a
Mhm.
part of Deadwood that is really featured in the show, and then a more respectable part of the town where people like Sheriff Seth Bullock and businessmen resided in their little Victorian cottages. So it
Mhm.
was, and the two areas were only a couple hundred yards apart,
Right.
but it was, I
Yeah,
mean, it
it's
was
still
really
a
a,
tiny,
yeah,
geographically, it's a tiny place.
yeah, it extended just about a mile
Mhm.
if you include its little uh, suburbs, so to speak, little hamlets that were part of the larger Deadwood. And I mean, it was a really sharp delineation between the respectable part of town and the wild and, and lawless part of town. And you couldn't mistake one for the other. And
Right.
there was also, in between, there was also Chinatown, which played a large role in Deadwood's life.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to talk about that later. Let's leap into that because it uh, uh, Deadwood is a remarkably diverse
Mm-hmm.
community, and to some extent that may be part of the illegality because they don't have segregation laws or things like that yet. It's just Wild West. So yeah, there's an incredible diversity among the people that are moving there.
And first and foremost, the Chinese. At that time, the Chinese were excoriated in most of the West. They were banned in a lot of places. They couldn't own property. There was, of course, a movement afoot in California and elsewhere to expel the Chinese altogether. Killing a Chinese was not necessarily considered too serious a crime in a lot of the West. In Deadwood, it was the exact opposite. The Chinese could own property. Their rights were respected by the law, and their rights were enforced by the law in Deadwood, such as it was.
Mhm.
And there was an incredible atmosphere of tolerance. There are a number of reasons for that. One of them was quite frankly that the Chinese ran a number of opium dens in Chinatown, and a fair number of Deadwood's better citizens could be found in the opium dens.
Mhm.
And so you're not going to cut off one of your chief sources of recreation and pleasure.
Yeah.
And the Chinese were also very savvy at ingratiating themselves with the whites in Deadwood. For instance, in I don't recall if it was 1877 or 78, but one of those 2 years, the town didn't raise enough money for its annual Fourth of July celebration, which was a big deal. And so the Chinese merchants stepped up and made up the difference, in addition to supplying, of course, the fireworks.
Ah, yeah.
So they were very adept at integrating themselves into the community as best as they could, and quite successful. It's really remarkable and kind of refreshing to see that. There was even a Chinese order of Masons
Okay.
who mingled with the white Masons in Deadwood.
Yeah. And presumably, once you start talking about Masons, there's a Masonic Hall, which is also probably a tent, or at least initially. Am I right about that? That kind of,
Or a false front building.
or a false front building? Yeah. Yeah. Um, l- Let me check real quick and see if we've got any shout outs or any questions. We do have a comment. Um, Dave Hatcher writes, "My mother was born in Deadwood in 1920 before it was incorporated." I, it's not part of this book, but Deadwood is definitely still uh, a going concern, and it I suppose it does draw from its original Wild West legend.
It draws hundreds of thousands of visitors a year,
Yeah.
in part from its Wild West legend, and there's a number of there's three outstanding museums in Deadwood dedicated to the history of Deadwood, and one of which is a brothel, a
Okay.
reconstructed brothel,
A brothel
right?
museum.
Brothel museum,
Yeah.
and so it's worthwhile for its history. It also lives to an extent off its casinos.
Okay.
There are a lot of casinos in Deadwood, kind of an extension of the gambling from the 1870s.
Yeah.
That's sort of analogous to the casinos today. So it still has that kind of rough atmosphere to it. The historic sites, along with the casinos, along with the bikers. I mean, it still has a rough feel to it.
Right. It's not too far from Sturgis, right?
No, it's not too far
So
from
when the
Sturgis at
bikers go to
all.
Sturgis, they probably head over to Deadwood and
Of course,
yeah.
of course.
The so the bikers are the miners
Yeah,
and the new casinos are the old gambling dens.
exactly.
Uh, well, you wrote a number of Civil War books earlier in your career, and they were battle studies. And I know you would go to the battlefields uh, to learn about the terrain and be there. Did you find going to Deadwood and going around there valuable for this book? Did you do battlefield hiking for
Oh,
Deadwood?
absolutely. I spent a grand total of about 5 weeks
Okay.
in the Black Hills. Not only did I spend time in Deadwood itself getting to know the town, and also spend a good deal of time at the archives. There's an organization called Deadwood History Incorporated that it runs the museums that also has a tremendous archives. And if you look at my bibliography, you'll find the majority of primary sources, apart from newspapers, come from the archives at Deadwood History Incorporated. I also spent a great deal of time in the Black Hills itself. I climbed the Black Elk Peak. I
Okay.
climbed Bear Butte on the edge of the Black Hills, which was sacred to the Cheyenne. I visited every site that was uh, considered sacred by the Lakota in the Black Hills. I visited the site of every stage station where they're still known, every Indian massacre in the Black Hills,
Okay.
every stagecoach robbery, again, where this exact site is known, every stagecoach station on the periphery of Black Hills. So I really immersed myself in the Black Hills. And it was absolutely essential to getting the right flavor for the book. For instance, something as simple as this, when I was talking about what the miners were up against when they were panning for gold, I mentioned that if the miners stopped working for a second, he would have flies swarming all over him. I know
Oh,
that because when I was hiking in the Black Hills, if I stopped for a moment, I'd have flies swarming all over me. So little
oh,
things like that you can only get from having walked the ground.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Um, the gosh, we're in the back half of our interview, and one of the major reasons why a person would want to read a book about Deadwood or watch the TV show or whatever would be this cast of characters. And we're uh 40 minutes into our interview and we haven't really name checked too many of these characters. And they were people, a lot of them were people who were nationally famous at the time that went into Deadwood. We've got Wild Bill Hickok goes to Deadwood and there he dies. Um,
Was murdered.
and and all of these so, yeah, briefly tell us about Hickok's brief experience there at Deadwood. He was near the end of it. He was pretty rough at that time. He was near the end
He
of
was
his
only he
career.
was only 38, but his
Yeah,
eyesight was failing him, which of course is that's critical for a gunslinger
for
to
a
have good
gunslinger. Yeah.
eyesight. He, the time the Black Hills Gold Rush was picking up steam, he was in Cheyenne, Wyoming territory. He just married a woman who was 10 years his senior, who was
Hmm.
fairly wealthy, but he didn't want to live off her money. He was on the skids himself at that point. He'd long since lost his last job as a sheriff in Kansas, been run out of the state pretty much.
Hmm.
And well, he went. He joined together with a buddy of his named Colorado Charlie Utter, and they formed a caravan of gamblers, saloon owners, prostitutes, miners to make the 275-mile trip from Cheyenne to the Black Hills. As they were getting ready to leave Cheyenne, they were at Fort Laramie, and the officer of the day asked if they would take one more prostitute with them. And the officer, they pointed the woman out to them. She was a young 20-year-old, disheveled, partly naked, so-called soiled dove, which is what they
Mhm.
called prostitutes then, who was sobering up in the guardhouse. And they reluctantly decided to take her along. She happened to be Calamity Jane.
Mhm. Yeah, here's
And
we
so,
don't have a picture of Hickok, but here's one of his fellow travelers.
right.
Yeah, which
And
brings up an go ahead, another one of the incredible characters in this book.
oh yeah, and Calamity Jane is inseparable with Deadwood and vice versa, and she appears throughout my story in various guises as kind of a good Samaritan who nursed smallpox victims to out and out alcoholic and of the worst sort, defender of other prostitutes, often at the point of a gun. She played many roles, and she is weaves in and out of the story. Hickok, of course, plays a dramatic role early in the story with his entering Deadwood, hoping to strike it rich either through mining himself or more to his taste by playing poker and mining the miners, so to speak.
Hmm.
And within 2 weeks of his entering Deadwood, he's dead at the hands of a murderer's bullet. He makes a very dramatic but brief appearance in Deadwood. And if he had, and I really delve deeply into that. And I also ponder if he had been murdered in a more prosaic place in Deadwood, what would that have done to his legend and the legend of Deadwood? Conversely, if he had not been murdered, would he have become the legendary figure he is today? It's kind of interesting to ponder those points.
Right, right.
And there
Because
were other
he was
larger than
not in a position in real time. He was not in a position where he was highly respected or, he was on the outs when he went to Deadwood.
right. But the instant his head hit the table in the bar where he was shot, he became a legend.
Yeah.
You're reading the newspaper accounts of his murder. Suddenly, all his shortcomings are forgiven. His deeds as a marshal and sheriff are exaggerated beyond any possible belief. His
Hmm.
body count, all from legitimate gunfights, as the newspapers would say, is shoots through the roof.
Yeah.
He becomes this heroic figure in newspaper. It counts. It started with a newspaper account in St. Louis that just turned him into a legend, and it was reprinted as far away as Montreal, Canada. So
Hmm.
he went from being this former lawman on the skids to becoming a national celebrity post mortem.
Right. And we still have Dead Man's Hand.
Right.
The poker players can't agree what it is, but it's always this reference to whatever Hickok was holding when he was murdered.
Aces and eights, supposedly.
Aces and aces. Yeah, yeah. Uh, so I mean, these are just two of the characters, but there's so many. If we had only just gone through the characters, Peter, we would have it would take the entire time. I like Jack Langrish
Oh yeah.
because I love the fact that in just a few, okay, we've talked about these, they open banks, they open brothels, they open gambling dens. Within a few months of there being nothing there, they have a couple theaters.
They have a Shakespearean theater
They have
with
a
Jack
Shakespearean
Langrish, who,
theater, and
right,
Jack Langrish is doing Hamlet for people.
right. And yeah, all the characters that, for those who have watched the HBO series, all the characters, Calamity Jane, Jack Langrish, Sheriff Seth Bullock, the pimp and barkeep, Al Swearingen, they're all in my book. They're
Mhm.
all in my book, and they're real life stories. And sometimes they parallel their portrayal in the series pretty closely. Other times they diverge, but they're just as interesting, if not more so,
Yeah.
for being true. So there's just a remarkable cast of characters. on both sides of the law that come to life in Deadwood, and then the great again George Hurst, the great multimillionaire mining presence,
Hmm.
who kind of is kind of looms over Deadwood as he's buying up gold mines. I mean, it's down to people who you've never heard of before, like some of the madams, some of the gamblers. Just their stories make for rousing reading.
Right, right. Hey, let's take a picture. Let's take a look at a couple of pictures. You mentioned a picture that you said is one of your favorites, and we're going to look at that in a second. But let's take another look at unpacking the picture you used for the dust jacket. Now, this was taken in 1876. Am I right?
That's right. This was
This,
taken only a few, maybe 2 or 3 months after the town's founding, after it was just 2 or 3 months earlier, it would have been just a gulch with a few shanties and tents sprinkled about. And here's what grew up: all these false front stores. You see uh, the full-fledged false front bank,
yep.
liquor dealers.
There's a dentist.
Yep, you see the dentist. You see the placer mine in the foreground, and keep that placer mine in mind. So when we look at another picture, I want to
Okay.
explain something in it.
And then we're looking, is this what you called the better part of town? Uh,
This is Main Street, the business
yeah.
part of town. In the background are the Badlands, which is where the saloons and brothels and opium dens all are.
Right. So, like you
You see
said,
where
these
that
people
wagon
live
is in
in,
the background, where that tall pine tree is. From
yeah.
there back would be the Badlands.
Okay. Yeah. So, people living right on top of each other. And the difference between high living and low living is a pine tree in the middle
Exactly.
distance. Let's take a look at this other photo because this is one you told me that you think is the most evocative photo that you found. And it's taken a year later, right? But
It's
it's
taken in
pretty much from the same
1877.
perspective. Am I right?
Same perspective, but you see that placer mine has been paved over, so to speak, with dirt. In
Yeah,
the
I
foreground
noticed.
there, that's where the placer mine was. And you see the same clock, you see the
Mhm.
bank and the liquor dealers, but you see a whole you see a plethora of new businesses that have popped up. The hardware store, the Wyoming store in the background. There's a store that has looks like a Shell oil. Texaco, pardon me, Texaco oil
Yeah,
sign
the
there.
star over here.
The
Yeah.
star. And in this picture too, you can see the Badlands, the start of the Badlands saloons a little more clearly in the
Hmm.
background. And then you have that building, like the third building down on the left with the barrels on the roof,
Yes.
which still puzzle me. I can't decide if those are chimneys, or I think maybe more likely they're for collecting rainwater, for drinking, and also for fire prevention, because that was a big hazard in Deadwood,
Right. You're going to
these
need to have,
bees.
yeah. And there are also barrels on across the street on the roofs of the buildings over here.
Right. And I think they were used for collecting rainwater for again for fire prevention.
Maybe. Now, you've used the term a couple of times, false front stores. And since we're looking at them, could you give us a little more, just a little more detail on what you mean by a false front store?
Sure, a false front building is one that has a relatively fancy front exterior, but the building itself behind that front is just kind of planks and boards, maybe with maybe some rough shingled roofing. That's a false front building.
Hmm. So yeah, so well, that's quite a metaphor for Deadwood, isn't it? So
Yeah,
something that
exactly.
something that
Deadwood and for
looks
the
beautiful, but is maybe a little rougher once you
yeah,
go in the door.
right, right.
Um, so yeah, what we've kind of talked about that. We've talked about uh, uh, some of the other ways people made money, mining the miners, with gambling, with prostitution, with theaters and banks and all of that. Um, and but then basically it comes to, I don't want to call it an end, but it's near the end of your book. By 1879, this all of this burns down. in one
Right.
night.
Right.
And so, and part of that to me makes the story all the more fascinating. It's almost it's not like a progressive story where there's nothing and then they build it and then it becomes a great big city or something. It's gone. It's gone in one night in 1879. This fire.
September.
Yeah. Am I right about that? September?
September 1879.
Yeah. And so that's like 3 years and then it's gone. Tell us about that. Tell us about how the whole thing just comes to an end.
Well, there had been the fear of fire for a long time, but the town just didn't take the proper steps to mitigate against it. And in fact, the two newspapers in town were always um, harping on the look, we're going to burn down if we don't take some serious measures at controlling, you know, old rusted stoves that are used for chimneys and rusty chimney pipes and all these these pine buildings that are
Hmm.
they're just tinder boxes.
Yeah.
And so in September 1879, the inevitable happens. A fire starts, spreads through town, makes them for some really exciting reading too, if I may say so myself.
Hmm.
And the town, though, it rebuilt very quickly, but a lot of people chose to leave. A lot of the miners, since the placer mines coincidentally were winding down, a lot of the prostitutes, a lot of the miners, a lot of the gamblers decided to move on to new diggings, newer pickings, fresher pickings in places like Leadville, Colorado, where new mines were discovered. And the Deadwood that reemerged was more civilized, for lack of a better word. It was more prosaic. It was smaller, considerably smaller, and it became a sort of a service community for the nearby town of Lead, which is where the Homestake mine and it's all its hundreds of employees were. And so Deadwood became, it went from being a gold mining town to being a service economy town. And the people of Deadwood sensed right away that something had passed. Is in early 1880, shortly after the town rebuilt itself, the leading newspaper in town ran a series called Early Deadwood Days.
Okay.
And they were talking, it was recollections of Deadwood pioneers, of the old timers from
Hmm.
3 years or from 4 years earlier.
4 years
So
before. Yeah.
even the people of Deadwood recognized that they had lost something. They had lost their Wild West flavor. And they tried their best to preserve that through this newspaper series, preserve the legend that was already had been created.
Right. Now, during the legendary period, uh, you in the book, I see a conflict or a supposed conflict amongst the people that there are those that want to create a community, and that there are those that see this as it's going to be temporary anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They don't intend to stay, and that this seems to create uh, a conflict. It, let me just ask you, during the old Deadwood days period, uh, was there an established feeling that they were going to create a town, or
There
did
was a
those people think we're just going to clear out the gold and go somewhere else?
there was a tension between the two, but I would say the majority, people like Seth Bullock,
Hmm.
who was the sheriff for a time and one of the leading businessmen. He and his partner, Saul Starr, people like that, they ran a hardware business. They wanted law and order. They wanted an established town. And they were on the one side. And then epitomized on the other side is Al Swearingen,
Okay.
the saloon owner and pimp was into make a killing for as long as he possibly could. He personified that side of the picture. And those are in the Deadwood series, they're the two stars, Swearingen and Seth Bullock, and they
Mhm.
emerge as two extremely significant characters in my book,
Right.
representing the two extremes of Deadwood. And so there was that tension throughout this period in Deadwood between making a quick buck and let's take it a little slower here and try to establish something that's going to last.
Hmm. Now, which brings us, we're about out of our time, but it brings us to a phrase that I had not originally noticed when I read it, but I read it again today just before we started, and it's right there in your story about the fire. And how does so I'm going to evoke this phrase that you wrote. How does this blind entrepreneurial spirit contribute to the demise of Deadwood? You sort of evoke at least what that phrase at one point.
Well, everyone was looking out for themselves.
Uh-huh.
And despite halting efforts to create more of a sense of community, particularly in terms of basic fire prevention methods, getting
Mhm.
enough hoses, enough firefighting equipment, the town just couldn't get it together. No
Mhm.
one, there was a sense of community, but it only extended so far. The businessmen, merchants, others weren't willing to pony up the money needed, and so that the fire and the lack of concern about firefighting led up to it. It's kind of a metaphor
Mhm.
for the limits of community in Deadwood and the way that avarice and greed can trump a sense of community
Right.
in the best sense of the word.
Right. I almost have to, I can't avoid evoking one of the best imagery pieces of imagery that you create there in the last chapter. You still need to buy the book and read it, everybody. But yeah, you notice that the when the fire first starts in the bakery, everybody chips in to try to save all of the flour that the baker has recently purchased, and they don't try to fight the
Right.
fire. And then the fire
Right.
spreads and burns down the entire town. But they saved the
Exactly.
flour.
Right.
And yeah, and that's a metaphor for sort of the way that they treated their community. But of course, Deadwood persists. It persisted. It exists, and it goes on. Uh, yeah. What else do you have to say about this period of time? It's a city that only exists in a short period of time, but it's remarkably diverse and exciting and
And
vibrant.
a lot happens. More happens in Deadwood in 3 years than happened in most towns in 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Yeah.
It's a whole Wild West experience just compacted into 3 years.
Yeah, what would you say just to put a cap on the discussion? Why does someone need to go and get Deadwood and learn more about the truth of this legend?
If you want to understand the Western experience, what it was really like to live in the Old West from the ground up by Deadwood.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Um, all right, Peter, thank you for joining us. What are you working on next, or what are you thinking about next for the folks?
I'm still in the West. I'm working on a book on Virginia City and the Comstock Lode. It's got a
Okay, more
working
mining,
more mining. It's got
silver,
more
huh?
gunslinging and all that.
Uh-huh.
And it's got a working title of Bonanza. You can guess where I got that from,
Yeah, I can see where you would get that. Yeah,
right?
sure.
Yeah,
Um, So yeah, and then it seems like it could be another exercise in painting a truthful picture that is more compelling than the legends that draw our attention in the first place.
absolutely. I hope so, at least.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us, Peter. I want to remind everybody at home, because we're going to look at that dust jacket one more time because it's one of my favorites, that the book we're talking about, the book you want to order, is Deadwood, Gold, Guns, and Greed in the American West. It comes to us from Alfred Knopf Publishing, and we thank them for publishing it. The cost is $35. You can order it at the link in the comments, and we will send it to you with a custom signed bookplate signed by author Peter Cozzens. Peter, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Bjorn.
Yeah.
It's always wonderful being on your show.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And for those of you at home, thank you for joining us on A House Divided, and we will see you next time.